Welcome to the Chase Podcast. Dr. Ron Charles is a renowned archaeologist, author, historian, speaker, missionary, and is known as the Christian Indiana Jones. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and information about this global ministry.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ron Charles. Thanks for tuning in today. You know, there was a tremendous amount of activity in Jesus' life the last few months that he lived before his crucifixion. And we want to cover some of those in this session. After the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead, after Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, then Jesus raised him. Then Jesus left the Jerusalem region and traveled back north and through Ephraim and even into the Galilee. And we really don't know a whole lot of what happened on that trip. We have a couple of occasions where the Word of God talks about it, and then, but most of the emphasis was not on what Jesus did during this time. Now, the book of Luke is quite unique. The book of Luke was actually a compilation of a number of eyewitnesses to Jesus' life. Tiberius Caesar had organized a special commission to investigate the life of Jesus and investigate all of these teachings, the miracles that he was supposed to have done, and the various things associated with his life. And then after this commission was finished, then they were going to give a review of what they found to Tiberius Caesar. Well, Jesus was crucified in the midst of this gathering of information, and so the report that was given to Tiberius was somewhat incomplete. So he demanded that the commission gather more information about not only Jesus' life, but also the influence that Jesus had upon the region, if not the entire Roman world. And so it was quite a large task. And so it was each member of the commission, there was 130 members, were given a specific locale to pull together all this information. And one of those was Theophilus. And Theophilus was the commission member who was basically over the Jerusalem region and even on up into the Galilee on occasions. He had a friend that he commissioned to help him with this, and this was Luke the attorney from Antioch. Now, Luke originally began his professional life as an attorney, and then later on, he went back to school and got training as a physician. So Luke, the Luke that we have now, who wrote the Gospel of Luke as well as the Acts of the Apostles, was an attorney / physician. And by the time he was halfway through collecting the information about Jesus, he had become a believer in Jesus. And consequently, the latter part of his life, or the last half of his life, he was accompanied Paul on his missionary journeys. But the book of Luke is a compilation of well over 300 personal interviews that Luke made with people about Jesus. And that's why that some of the things we have in the book of Luke are in no other book except that book, because of all the other eyewitness accounts of Jesus, his teaching, his miracles, and so forth. And then what the daunting task that Luke had was to try to compile all of this into a record that would not be multiple hundreds of pages long. He had to make it so that it would be easily read in the Roman Senate without the senators becoming agitated and say, enough's enough. And so he had to get it down into readable and into an area, into a size that can be easily transported, but yet including the maximum amount of information that he could possibly do. And so most of the events of Luke came as a result of more than one eyewitness account, because one confirmed the other, although some of them were not really, we don't really know for sure. And these last few months of Jesus' life before his crucifixion, some of that area that we really don't have a lot of information about, but what we do have, we're going to try to cover that. As Jesus went up into the Galilee, he is coming back down through the northern part of Samaria, and we look at that in Luke, the 17th chapter. And so in Luke 17, verse number 11, it says this, "And it came to pass as he," meaning Jesus and the disciples that were with him, "went to Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered into a certain village, there met him 10 men that were lepers, which stood afar off. And they lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And when he saw them, he said unto them, Go show yourselves unto the priests. And it came to pass that as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, and with a loud voice glorified God, and fell down on his face at his feet, I mean Jesus' feet, giving him thanks, and he was a Samaritan. And Jesus answering said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? And there was not found that returned unto him to glorify God, save this one stranger." Now the cities of Paraphius and Archidelius were villages in northern Samaria, the region of northern Samaria, that had been set aside for a specific purpose. The two cities were given as a wedding present to Salome, who was the sister of, now this was not the Salome who was the daughter of Herodias with the fame of John the Baptist. This was Salome, who was a sister of Herod the Great. For her wedding present, Herod gave her these two cities. Now, Salome's mother-in-law, the mother of her husband, was a leper. And she was basically an outcast from society, even though she was at the very high top of the wealth scale. She had multiple millions of dollars, of what would be equivalent in our society, but yet she was still a leper, and she was neglected by society and as an outcast of society. So with these two cities that were given to Salome, she put her own money as well as King Herod put his money into it, and they turned these two cities into two cities that were specifically for the treatment and the housing of lepers, who were, and these people had to be Roman citizens to live there. And not only did it have residences and places for them to live, but also hospitals and doctors, special food preparation places, activity centers, so they could, so they wouldn't be laying around, which is one of the hardest things for lepers to do. There has to maintain an activity to keep that blood flowing through the joints that are dead. And so there was a large emphasis put into effect, and so they became well known throughout the Roman Empire for the treatment of lepers. Now, after the death of Herod the Great, then Salome then gave these cities to Livia. Livia was the wife of Emperor Augustus Caesar, and she maintained the same type of of help for the lepers, except she opened it for all people with the approval of the local authorities, not just Roman citizens. But if you were approved by the authorities to go there, it didn't matter whether you were Samaritan, whether you were Galatian, whether you were Spanish, whether you were Italian, whether you were Egyptian, you could go there and be treated. And in addition, she had also temples that were built to represent every known religion in the region. There were 133 temples that were built, as well as housing for priests to service these various temples. So not only did you have the Jewish religious persuasion there, but you also had Zoroastrianism, you had the Egyptian, you had the Greek and the Roman, and every other type of religion and religious persuasion that was in the region at the time could have representation there in the cities. And so it was a phenomenal centuries ahead of its time experience on dealing with lepers, and many of these lepers were cured as a result of the fight against the leprosy, and as a result of the special treatment that they received, and they became world renowned, or the Roman world renowned anyway, for the treatment of lepers, and lepers would come from all over the Roman world to be treated there. Now, after the death of Augustus Caesar, then these two cities were transferred to Tiberius Caesar, and he was the next emperor after Augusta. Well, Tiberius didn't feel that it was his responsibility to take care of these leper cities, and so he gave them to the Roman governor, Cyrillus of Syria. And the governor didn't want to be bothered with them, and so he farmed them out to local dignitaries and local authorities to take care of the lepers, and it went downhill very, very, very quickly. And the food preparation places, within a matter of 3 years after the governor of Syria began to take over, were abandoned. They were eliminated. The special fields where they grew crops and grains and so forth for the food for the lepers were abandoned. And the hospitals were closed. Doctors were sent to other places. And so by the time of Jesus' ministry, the once great leper curing facilities and leper where lepers were taken care of had become nothing more than two walled villages where lepers were dumped. Primarily when there was a big celebration in the city of Antioch, a celebration in the city of Rome, or the city of Jerusalem, or the city of Caesarea Maritima, all the lepers were gathered up before the ceremony, and they were dumped in these two walled villages, and there they had to remain until after the celebration was over. So by the time Jesus' ministry was at least 2 to 3 years old, these great, great cities for the cures of lepers had now been reduced to nothing more than a drop place for the afflicted lepers. Jesus went through those villages, and we don't know which one that he confronted the 10. We also don't know whether these 10 were all Jews, whether they were Roman citizens, whether some were Persians and others were Greeks and others were Egyptian. We don't know. But we do know that they confronted Jesus. They knew who he was, and they knew of his experience in dealing with lepers. They knew of his reputation in healing lepers and those that came to him willingly and voluntarily. And Jesus never turned any away. He healed them. And so they came to Jesus and sought his help and sought his healing power if he could do anything for them. And Jesus told them, he says, go back to your respective temples. And again, we don't know whether these were Jewish temples or whether he just sent them back to the various temples that which they were part of that particular religion. We don't know. But we do know that Jesus sent them away, and then as they walked to the various temples that they were going to be inspected by their resident priests, and the resident priests and the temples are the only thing that remained in those cities, except for the beggars themselves, the lepers themselves. And so Jesus sent them away, and as they went to their respective temples, they were healed. And so the leprosy was totally gone. Now, leprosy was something that was dreaded by all peoples and all societies, but the reason for the leprosy was different from different groups of people. To the Romans, leprosy was caused by a failure to keep clean. To drink clean water and to bathe in clean water and that type of thing, which is probably closer than anything else. To the Jews, it was because there was sin in their family. So if there was sin in the family, the immediate family, as well as the far family, further back, then they would get leprosy. To the Greeks, leprosy was caused by they offended the goddess Aphrodite, and they offended the god Zeus, and so they were submitted to leprosy as a result of that. To the Egyptians, they got leprosy because they offended the god Zeth, and they also offended Osiris and Isis, and when they did, they were struck with leprosy. And so there were various reasons for the leprosy as far as the cultures were concerned, but there was no healing for any of them. And so when Jesus healed these men, then they were, needless to say, they were excited about the healing, but only one out of the 10 came back and thanked Jesus for doing the deed that he did and for doing what he needed to do to cleanse them from this leprosy. Unfortunately, today is not much better. Believers, they have a very difficult time many times thanking the Lord for what they have, what he has done. Many times we are more concerned about asking him for something else that we don't have, or something else that is not within our ability to obtain, rather than thanking him for what we have already. When we minister to the persecuted believers in the Middle East, in Egypt, and Sudan, and Libya, and different places, many of those believers who are forced to live in the garbage facilities, the garbage dumps of their area, they have leprosy. And the leprosy, they catch it because of the unsanitary conditions and the difficulties there. And I've put my arms around many of them and prayed with them and hugged them without the fear of catching the disease. You can't catch it from one person to the next, but it's just very putrefying to be around them. And but you know, even with that, we have within those group of believers, there's probably out of 1,000 believers, 999 of them make the statement, I don't need to ask God for anything else. I don't need to ask Jesus for anything. He has already given me the greatest thing that he can give, which is his own life, his own blood for the destruction of my sins and for the purification of my body to make it prepared so when I leave this world, I am fit to serve him and to be accepted by him. Of course, we know that that's not a qualification. We know that the blood of Jesus is the thing that purifies us and makes us worthy to go to heaven. But they feel like that they have to have a pure body to be accepted by the Lord. And so they say, we We don't have to ask God for anything because He's already given us all that He has. He's given us life. He's given us forgiveness of sin. And they don't. They don't ask God for anything. They don't ask Him for deliverance. They don't ask Him for clean water. They don't ask Him for food. They don't ask Him for healing and deliverance from diseases and things that affect them. What they do, though, every day is that they raise their hands to heavens and they say, Jesus, I thank you that you have cleansed me from all sin. I thank you that you have seen worthy to give your life for me. Unfortunately, we of the Western world and Western Christianity, we have a very difficult time thanking the Lord for what we have. I'm sure that not many of us will sit down at the breakfast table every morning and look around and say, Father, I thank you for this house. I thank you for the eggs and the bacon that I'm eating right now. I thank you for the bread that I opened up out of the package. I thank you for my job, which I'll be going to shortly. I thank you for running water. I thank you for clean running water. I thank you for electricity. Many times that is on the back burner, if not at all. But we do bend the Lord's ear on the things we don't have. Lord, my head is killing me. I need for you to touch it right now. Lord, can't you do something about this traffic so I don't have to be aggravated with this traffic day after day after day? Lord, can't you do something with my boss? Make him understandable of where I'm coming from, who I am, and what I'm doing for him. And so, the list seems to be much longer on things that we want God to do for us rather than thankful for what He has already done. And I'm not saying that if we complain about the things that we have and don't thank Him that God will take it away. I don't believe that. Now, in some religions, they do teach that. Some of the African Christian pastors, they preach that from their pulpits. They say that if you complain about something, God will take it away from you, and then you're a bit reduced down to the next level. I don't believe that happens, but the fact still remains is that we do need to be motivated, if nothing more than but just these 10 lepers, in which only one came back to thank Him. That can be our motivation, and to say every day we look around and say, Lord, I thank you for the clothes I'm wearing. I thank you for the shoes that I have on. I thank you for the car that I'm driving. Even though it's not certainly the best or the best I've ever had, it still will get me from point A to point B. And I will not complain. I will not be dissatisfied. I'll just be thankful, and until you see fit for me to go another direction or to bring something else into my family and into myself. And so these lepers certainly had nothing to lose, but the fact that Jesus gave them life, it should have been enough for them to return and to thank Him, regardless of who they were, whether they were Jewish, whether they were Roman, Greek, whether they were Egyptian, whether they were Libyan, Persian, Galatian, Cappadocian, it didn't matter. The disease was the disease that affected the human being. And Jesus healed it without any respect of persons, without any prerequisite of what they had to do, what they must do, except make their way to their temple. That being done, the healing started on its way. And by the time they got to where they was going, their leprosy was totally gone. So today, let's make a decision that we will thank the Lord for what we have. and then be extra special if He gives us something that we need. But most assuredly, the first thing we do is say, Lord, I just thank you for your salvation. I thank you for my wife. I thank you for my husband. I thank you for my children. I thank you for my car. I thank you for my house. I thank you for my church. Regardless of whether that fits within your category that you want now or not, thank Him. That is what we need. May the Lord bless you today.
The Chase with Dr. Ron Charles is sponsored by supporters of the Cubit Foundation. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and discover how you can support this global ministry.